They called her a liability. Nervous. Unstable. Just a nurse who couldn't hold it together. Dr. Hargrove had heard the rumors spreading through Norfolk General's corridors like a contagion, whispers about Katie Morrison's erratic behavior, her obsessive questioning about billing codes, her sudden interest in insurance referral patterns that had nothing to do with patient care. He didn't know she'd spent the last 20 years rebuilding a life from ash. He had no idea that the woman clutching a graduation program near the back of the Norfolk High School auditorium had once commanded 47 rescue operations across Helmand Province without losing a single operator. Dead wrong about who he was standing 300 feet away from. Katie Morrison's hands trembled as she gripped the cardstock program, but not from nerves, from restraint. The trembling wasn't fear. It was the effort of keeping 20 years of muscle memory locked inside her body. She'd learned early that a woman could survive anything if she learned to disappear. Disappear from the paperwork. Disappear from the official records. Disappear from the version of herself that had earned 2 silver stars and a call sign whispered in bunkers from Kandahar to Khost. The auditorium smelled of industrial carpet cleaner and adolescent cologne laid thick as smoke, that particular stink of a gymnasium converted for ceremony, folding chairs arranged in military precision, metal on linoleum, 500 parents already claiming prime spots 2 hours before the processional began. She positioned herself near the back exit, the way she always did. Sight lines clear. Escape route visible. The door behind her was metal, hinged on the left, required approximately 3 seconds to reach and open. Old habits. Survival architecture. The kind of spatial awareness that never really left your nervous system once it had been installed there by 6 years of active deployment and 14 years of careful erasure afterward. The program in her hands was already soft from handling, creased where she'd opened and closed it 24 times since this morning. Her son's name was printed on page 7, Marcus James Morrison, graduating summa cum laude from Norfolk High School class of 2024. The letters seemed to shift slightly when she looked at them, the way important things sometimes did when your hands carried scars you couldn't explain and your past was classified with a security clearance you were legally forbidden to discuss. Her navy dress was simple, she'd chosen it specifically for invisibility, the kind of garment that blended into auditorium crowds, that didn't draw attention or require explanation. Her only jewelry was a small anchor pendant, thin gold that caught light when she moved, a memory she'd kept that was technically not supposed to exist. Beneath her purse lining, pressed against the fabric where it wouldn't be visible unless someone searched deliberately, was a single worn combat boot. The left one. The heel was scuffed from desert sand. The laces were frayed from being tied and untied in the dark. She couldn't have explained to anyone why she'd brought it today, or why she kept it at all, locked in her bedroom closet behind winter coats that never got worn in the Norfolk heat. The boot felt like evidence. Like proof. Like the only piece of herself she'd been allowed to keep when the official death certificate was filed under a name that wasn't actually hers. Katie's breathing pattern shifted as she scanned the auditorium. Eyes tracking to the stage where her son would walk. Eyes moving to the tech booth where a student was adjusting a spotlight. Eyes registering exits, main doors on the north wall, emergency exit behind the bleachers, service entrance near the curtain. This was how she moved through the world now. Not like a nurse. Like someone who had learned very young that the next threat could come from any direction, and the people who survived were the ones who saw it arriving. Across the auditorium, Dr. Principal Hargrove watched her with the confidence of a man who'd never understood what he was actually seeing. He moved through the crowd with a superintendent's practiced ease, glad-handing parents, accepting congratulations on another successful graduation season, his smile practiced and warm and utterly hollow. But the smile faltered when his eyes landed on Katie Morrison standing alone near the back exit, clutching her program, her attention fixed on the stage. He knew who she was. Knew exactly who she was. More importantly, he knew what she'd asked last month when she'd come into his office at Sacred Heart with questions about sports physical referral patterns, questions about why the billing codes had inflated by 43% in the past 8 months, questions about the partnership he had with his wife's urgent care clinic that seemed to be receiving a disproportionate number of expensive follow-up appointments. Hargrove's jaw tightened. He looked away. Then, almost imperceptibly, he moved toward the group of parents clustered near the bleachers and made a phone call, his voice low, his words brief. The expression on his face was the particular expression of a man who was already calculating how to fix a problem before it became irreversible. Katie Morrison had become that kind of problem. The kind that asked questions. The kind that noticed patterns. The kind that might have documented those patterns somewhere, filed them somewhere, prepared them for someone who would care about the answer. Katie took a measured breath, the kind she'd been taught to take during CSAR training, where CSAR stood for Combat Search and Rescue, though that was a classification she'd never mentioned and a skill set she'd spent 20 years pretending she'd never learned. She centered herself the way meditation guides suggested, the way civilian therapists recommended, the way her own hands had learned to do in dark desert nights when incoming fire made the earth shake. Just breathing. Just being present. Just trying to exist in this moment where she was a mother, not a ghost. A nurse, not a legend whose call sign had been struck from official records. A woman in a Navy dress at her son's graduation, not Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Morrison, who technically died in a training accident in 2003. The auditorium filled around her. Families settling into metal folding chairs with that particular grunt of effort, children running between seats, the orchestra section moving into position with their instruments. The smell of the crowd shifted, women's perfume, men's cologne, the faint chemical sweetness of someone's hairspray, coffee and hand sanitizer, and the particular staleness of a gymnasium despite the open doors. The temperature seemed to rise with each new body that entered the space. Katie removed her cardigan and draped it over the back of her chair, revealing arms that bore faint scars across the knuckles, scars she'd always dismissed as kitchen accidents when anyone asked, though no one really did ask anymore. The scars were old enough that people had stopped noticing them years ago. The processional music began at 2:02 p.m. exactly. Some ceremony director called the exact time on a clipboard, coordinating with the photographer at the main entrance and the videographer positioned on a ladder near the gym's east wall. The orchestra section, violins and brass predominantly, a handful of woodwinds, struck up pomp and circumstance with the kind of energy that only high school musicians could muster, enthusiastic and slightly off-tempo and utterly genuine. Katie felt her shoulders lower slightly. The sound of the music seemed to release something in her chest, some pressure valve she'd been holding closed since this morning. This was happening. This moment was actually arriving. The first graduates began processing into the gymnasium, walking 2 by 2 down the center aisle, their graduation robes creating a river of blue and gold as they moved toward the stage. The crowd rose slightly, some parents standing immediately, others waiting for their own children to appear before committing to the full standing ovation that would come later. Katie remained seated for the moment, her program open to page 7, her eyes tracking the procession. She was looking for the particular face, the particular height and gait she would recognize in her sleep if sleep had ever come easily for her. The young men and women passed by her position, row after row of them, smiling and nervous and triumphant. The orchestra continued playing, their tempo steady now, their confidence building as they hit the main orchestration. And then he appeared. Marcus James Morrison, her son, wearing his graduation robes with the particular mixture of dignity and barely contained amusement that was his alone. His eye scanned the crowd. Katie recognized the moment he found her. A smile that started small and grew. A slight nod. Nothing demonstrative, nothing that would draw attention from the ceremony directors or the other parents, just a moment of acknowledgement between two people who understood each other without words. Katie pressed her hand against her heart, the anchor pendant cool beneath her palm, and she allowed herself one moment of unburdened pride. One moment where she was just a mother watching her son graduate. Just a woman in a navy dress at the back of an auditorium, nothing more, nothing less. The processional continued. The music played. The crowd shifted and settled. Everything was exactly as it should be. Everything was going exactly according to plan. The graduation ceremony was underway, the stage was set, her son was about to have his moment, and nobody knew that the woman standing near the back exit in a simple navy dress had spent the last 2 decades building an identity specifically designed to be invisible in moments just like this one. Nobody knew that she'd signed legal documents agreeing never to speak about who she'd been. Nobody knew that the trembling in her hands was actually discipline, not fear. Nobody knew what was about to arrive. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what Dr. Hargrove was about to do in the next few minutes, standing in the space between his pride at another successful graduation season and his desperation to protect the fraud that was bleeding $43,000 a month through billings codes he'd altered personally. The worst part was how quickly civility could transform into weaponization when someone's power structure felt threatened. The worst part was that Katie Morrison had just 37 minutes before her son's name would be called, before he would walk across that stage, before the world would try to strip away this moment from both of them. The orchestra finished the processional music. The principal began his opening remarks. The auditorium lights dimmed slightly. And in the back corner of the gymnasium, a man in a superintendent's blazer checked his phone, read the message that had just arrived, and made another call. His voice, when he spoke, was pleasant and conversational. His words, however, were already designed to end a career. Principal Hargrove emerged from the auditorium doors with the casual confidence of a man who'd never been told no. 2 security guards flanked him, one built like a filing cabinet, the other with a radio clipped to his belt and eyes that had seen exactly nothing worth seeing. They moved through the crowd with the momentum of bureaucrats executing policy, which meant they moved slowly enough to make sure everyone watched. Katie was still positioned in the back, dressed navy as midnight, program trembling in her hands. Not from fear. From the precise calibration of rage held behind a locked jaw. She'd stared down sandstorms in Helmand Province. She'd held a child's spine together with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She could hold still for this. Hargrove saw her. His walk didn't change, but something shifted in his shoulders, a hunter who'd spotted movement in tall grass. He was still 30 feet away when he began speaking, voice pitched at conversation volume but designed to carry. "Miss Morrison, I'm afraid there's been a complaint about your presence here." Katie's breath came level. Steady. The way you breathe before surgery, controlled, purposeful, fueling the next decision. "Several parents have expressed concerns," Hargrove continued, closing the distance, "about your recent employment issues." The words hit the auditorium like dropped glass. Katie felt the temperature shift around her. A woman furrows downturned. A father 2 sections over pulled his program tighter. A guidance counselor's eyes narrowed with a specific contempt reserved for people who didn't belong in nice buildings. The thing about humiliation is it doesn't matter how strong you are, the audience can smell vulnerability like blood in water, and Hargrove had just announced her status to everyone watching. He was close enough now that she could smell his cologne, something expensive that tried very hard to mask something cheap underneath. "I have every right to be here," Katie said. Her voice didn't rise. Didn't waver. Didn't ask. It stated a fact the way the sky states blue. Hargrove's expression didn't change, but she saw the calculation happen behind his eyes. She wasn't trembling. She wasn't looking away. She wasn't breaking. He'd expected breaking. His next move was already prepared for someone who would crumble. So he adjusted. He leaned closer, dropped his voice to that specific kind of quiet that carries further than shouting, the voice of a man about to gut someone in front of witnesses who could say they barely heard him. "You mean the son who had to explain to his guidance counselor why his unstable mother keeps losing jobs?" His smile could cut glass. "The charity case who got into Old Dominion despite his home situation?" The words landed where he'd aimed. Katie felt them hit. Felt them rattle against her ribs like something trying to escape. But her jaw tightened, and nothing else moved. Her hand stayed still. Her eyes stayed forward. She remained absolutely, devastatingly silent, which was worse for him than any response, because silence was a mirror, and what he saw reflected back was that his words had failed to break anything. He'd wanted a flinch. He got a wall. The processional music began drifting through the auditorium, that measured, ceremonial thing that signals the beginning of things that can't be stopped. The gymnasium doors opened. Students in burgundy robes began filing into position, and Hargrove's window was closing. He needed this finished before the ceremony locked him out of his own narrative. He gestured to the guards with the casual authority of a man accustomed to obedience. "Mrs. Morrison has been erratic lately. Asking inappropriate questions, making accusations against staff. For everyone's safety, I need you to escort her out." He'd pitched it loud enough for the nearest parents to hear. Loud enough that a mother 3 rows ahead pulled her daughter closer, not protectively, but separatively, the way you distance yourself from a potential threat. A father shook his head. A woman Katie recognized from the PTA last year, someone Katie had never spoken to, had never wronged, had never given any reason to judge, turned away like looking at Katie directly might be contagious. This was Hargrove's real power. Not his position. Not his authority. His ability to use a room full of strangers as a weapon. Katie's peripheral vision caught movement backstage, a flash of burgundy robe, a familiar face. Jacob. Her son. 18 years old, 6'1", eyes that looked exactly like hers but unscarred, watching his mother be dismantled in real time. Hargrove saw her track the movement. Saw where her attention had gone. And he twisted the knife with surgical precision. "Ms. Morrison, your son specifically requested we handle this quietly." He's embarrassed enough. The lie was so clean, so perfectly calibrated to destroy, that for a moment Katie didn't respond. Didn't breathe. Didn't exist in any meaningful way. He was telling her that her son, the reason she'd kept breathing through 20 years of erasure, the reason she'd scrubbed floors and broken her hands in hospitals and swallowed insults that could have gotten him killed if she'd responded, was ashamed of her. A single moment. That's all it took. Then Katie straightened. One measured breath. The kind of breath you take before a procedure, before the point of no return. Her voice came out level, quiet enough that only Hargrove and the guards could hear it clearly, but formed with enough precision that it carried to the rows behind her. "My son has waited 18 years to see me watch him walk across that stage. You'll have to drag me out in handcuffs." She said it the way someone states an immutable fact. The way someone tells you the sun rises east. Not anger. Not defiance. Just truth, delivered with the calm of someone who'd already decided she wasn't leaving, and Hargrove could work with that understanding or waste time arguing with physics. The guards exchanged a look, the kind of look that said this wasn't in their usual protocol. Hargrove had called for an escort, but what they were seeing was a woman who wasn't performing fear, wasn't begging, wasn't providing the drama that would justify their removal of her. She was just standing there, stating a boundary like it was already law. "Are you all right?" The voice came from 6 rows ahead. Young. Military bearing, even sitting down. A man in navy dress whites, the formal uniform, the kind you wore to ceremonies because someone had taught you that some things deserve formality. He was half risen from his seat, eyes locked on Katie with an intensity that suggested he'd seen her face in his own survival somewhere. Hargrove's phone was already in his hand. He'd anticipated this moment, not this specific moment, but the general concept that his power existed in networks, not in bodies. He turned away slightly, voice dropping to that urgent register that signals important people making important decisions. "Bill, it's Hargrove. I need that favor. We've got a situation here. Possible security threat." He was already walking, already moving Katie toward the auditorium doors. The guards had repositioned themselves, one on each side, not quite touching her yet but establishing territory. The processional music swelled. Jacob's name would be called in 90 seconds. Katie knew the graduation ceremony schedule the way she knew anatomy, essential information committed to memory. She had 90 seconds to decide whether to fight or walk. To escalate or preserve her son's ceremony. To protect her dignity or protect his moment. The guards began moving her toward the exit. Gently still. Hargrove had calculated that he could appear reasonable if he removed her smoothly, respectfully, like a professional handling an unfortunate situation. Katie moved with them, because the alternative was being physically dragged past every parent in that auditorium, and Jacob watching his mother resisting arrest at his own graduation. There are choices that aren't real choices. There are boundaries you draw in private because drawing them in public would cost people you love. The gymnasium doors opened. Applause began inside, that sustained wave that means the ceremony has become real and irreversible. Katie walked through the exit, guards on both sides, Hargrove finishing his phone call behind her, already pivoting to the next phase of his plan. The parking lot air hit her, cool, salted with Atlantic spray from water 6 miles inland. The sound of the auditorium faded to something distant and muffled. A siren wailed toward downtown Norfolk, somewhere else, some other emergency requiring some other person. Katie walked to her car. Didn't sit. Just stood there, hands on the hood, listening to applause filter through the concrete and steel and brick between her and her son. Inside the auditorium, Marcus Webb, Petty Officer First Class Marcus Webb, 8 years old again in a burning compound, hands holding his shoulders, a woman's voice saying "Stay with me, little man, stay with me," was already texting his SEAL team group chat with shaking fingers. His mind was moving at the speed things move when a neural pathway gets reactivated after 2 decades of scar tissue. A woman's face. Eyes the color of October Atlantic. Hands that had saved his life when he was small enough that saving him required being invisible. And he was certain, absolutely certain, that she was still invisible. That nobody else had seen what he'd seen. That she was standing in a parking lot somewhere, being erased again. The memory wasn't clean. It came in fragments, broken like the building itself. Marcus Webb sat in the auditorium bleachers, his navy dress white starched so rigid they barely bent when he leaned forward, and suddenly he wasn't watching a graduation ceremony. He was 8 years old again, buried under concrete and rebar, his right lung collapsing as dust choked the air he couldn't quite draw. The woman's voice came first, calm, steady, cutting through the screaming and the groaning of the building's skeleton giving way. "Stay with me, little man." Her hands moved with the kind of certainty that made fear feel impossible. She found the space between his ribs, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line, and used a ballpoint pen from her cargo pocket to decompress the tension pneumothorax that was crushing his chest. The hiss of air escaping. His lungs remembering how to breathe. Then the count. "Count the stars for me while I move you." Marcus had counted. 47. She'd carried him 8 miles through hostile territory with his small arms locked around her neck, and for 20 years he'd tried to find her to say thank you, but his records listed her as deceased, Senior Chief Petty Officer Chief Morrison, killed in a training accident, classified, closed file. Then he saw her. Back row, navy dress, hands folded against a graduation program. The face was older, weathered in ways that weren't from sun alone, but the eyes were the same. That particular shade of grey-blue that looked like they'd seen everything the world could throw at a person and had decided not to blink anymore. Marcus felt his stomach drop. He knew that presence, that absence of wasted motion, the way she occupied space like someone who'd learned exactly how much room she needed and not 1 inch more. The way she breathed, measured and controlled, as if oxygen was rationed. His pulse quickened. Heart rate climbing. He'd trained for 20 years to stay calm under pressure, had held his breath for 4 minutes at depth, had fast-roped from helicopters, had kicked down doors where men with guns waited on the other side. But sitting in a high school gymnasium watching his adoptive mother's son graduate, Marcus felt his composure crack. It was her. The Reaper. His hands trembled, not with fear, but with the kind of adrenaline that comes from encountering a ghost that should have stayed buried. He watched her throughout the ceremony, tried to understand what she was doing at a civilian graduation, tried to calculate the statistical impossibility of this moment. Then Principal Hargrove descended on her like a vulture that had spotted movement in the desert. Marcus saw the guards flanking him, saw the way Katie, because it was Katie now, not just a voice in his memory, simply stood still while the principal spoke loud enough for the surrounding families to turn and stare. She didn't defend herself. Didn't argue. She accepted the humiliation the way a sailor accepts a storm, as something happening to the landscape around her rather than something happening to her specifically. But Marcus saw what Hargrove didn't see, the white-knuckle grip on the graduation program, the way her breathing pattern didn't change even by a single count. He watched them escort her out. Watched her son's face appear backstage, confused and devastated. And that's when Marcus made his decision, the kind of decision that comes from training and instinct colliding at exactly the same moment. He waited until the ceremony ended. Waited until his own brother had walked across the stage, had thrown his cap in the air, had found him in the crowd. Then Marcus excused himself, found the stairwell, and made the call from the parking lot where the evening was warm and thick with the promise of rain. Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Chen answered on the second ring despite it being 2,300 hours, because Master Chief always answered when Marcus called. They'd survived 3 deployments together, and that purchased a certain currency. It's Webb. I need you to pull a classified file. Senior Chief Catherine Morrison. Operation Copper Dawn. She's alive. I'm looking at her right now. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Then, affirmative. Don't move. Don't approach. Sit tight and send me your location. Master Chief Chen hung up and made his own call, this one to SEAL Team 3 headquarters where the night watch stared at computer screens that never quite went dark. His security clearance was Tier 1, which meant the archives opened for him like a mouth. 20 years of classified files, redacted names, operational notes marked for eyes only, declassified 3 weeks ago when the Pentagon closed Operation Copper Dawn's investigation permanently. Senior Chief Catherine Reaper Morrison. Combat Search and Rescue Specialist. 2 Silver Stars. For Bronze Stars with Valor. 1 Navy Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor. Credited with solo rescue of entire SEAL Team 8 during the collapse of structural intelligence in Helmand Province, 2003. Status: terminated for security breach. Classified under Deep Cover Protocol. The file continued, presumed deceased per cover narrative. Family notification completed. All records sealed indefinitely. Except 20 years wasn't indefinite anymore. The seal had lifted. And now she was at a high school in Norfolk, being escorted out by security while her son watched. Chen woke his commanding officer at midnight. They talked for exactly 7 minutes. By 0600 hours, he had 12 Navy SEALs assembling in the parking lot of SEAL Team 3 headquarters, all in dress uniform, all wearing ribbons that marked them as people who'd seen things that wouldn't fit into normal conversation. He'd also made a call to the FBI field office in Norfolk. The special agent running the Financial Crimes Division had been investigating Principal Hargrove's billing scheme for 6 months. $16,000 in fraudulent athletic physical referrals. $32,000 more funneled through his wife's urgent care clinic. Embezzlement on a scale that required federal jurisdiction. The agent was on standby. Marcus drove to the address he'd found in the graduation program's parent directory, sat in his truck for 20 minutes, and let his memory do its work. The thumb-sized scar on his ribs where the pen had gone in. The sound of her voice, "Count the stars, little man," while his lungs re-inflated and the world stopped tilting sideways. The weight of her carrying him, 8 miles through Taliban-controlled territory with a kid clinging to her neck while her rifle stayed in her hands. The moment they'd reached the extraction point and she'd passed him to the other SEALs without a word, no goodbye, just a nod that meant you're going to be okay now. Katie answered the door in blue scrubs, her hair pulled back in a way that exposed the geography of scars along her left temple. She was heading somewhere, car keys in her hand, the kind of readiness that came from a lifetime of being called into emergencies. Marcus stopped. Restarted. Norfolk High graduation yesterday. I was there. And I was in Helmand Province in 2003. I was 8 years old. Katie's face drained of color like someone had pulled a drain plug behind her eyes. I think you have me confused with someone else. They called you Reaper. You told me to count the stars while you fixed my breathing. There were 47. Marcus kept his voice low, kept his hands visible, kept everything about his posture non-threatening because he understood, suddenly, that this woman was a pressure cooker sealed shut and one wrong move might rupture something. I remembered your voice before I remembered my own mother's. Because you were the last person I heard before everything went dark. Katie's breath caught. Just for a moment. Just a one-beat stutter in her exhale, but it was enough. She looked past him, checking the street, checking for witnesses, checking for the machinery of discovery that had chased her for 20 years. "I can't, I'm not allowed to, please don't," she whispered. Her hand trembled on the doorframe, and Marcus saw the pair of worn combat boots sitting inside the front closet, visible through the gap she'd left. They had dust on them, Afghan dust, red and permanent, and the laces were faded from sun and time and the kind of miles that wore through normal footwear in months. Those boots had carried her 8 miles. Those boots had memory. Katie closed the door. Not slammed it. Closed it the way someone closes a tomb, careful and final. But by then, Master Chief Chen was sitting in a classified command center 70 miles away, 12 Navy SEALs in dress uniform standing in the parking lot at 0700 hours the next morning, and FBI Special Agent Morrison, no relation to Katie, but the coincidence felt like fate, was reviewing 17 months of subpoenaed billing records that showed Principal Hargrove had created fake athletic injuries to justify referrals to his wife's clinic. Kickbacks. Fraudulent insurance claims. Embezzlement. Corruption operating from inside a public school system with the precision of a surgeon and the morality of a hyena. Meanwhile, Hargrove received a phone call that made his stomach flip sideways. The FBI. Financial crimes. They were coming tomorrow with a warrant. He'd known it was possible, had always known, but Katie Morrison had been supposed to stay disappeared. Dead, according to official records. Gone. Instead, she'd surfaced, and now his insurance scheme was under federal scrutiny because he'd gotten sloppy in his retaliation. Because he'd wanted her humiliated not just once but permanently. He made another call, this time to the superintendent's office. "I need documentation in writing that Katie Morrison displayed erratic behavior and made unfounded accusations. I need it filed before end of business today." The superintendent, beholden to Hargrove for covering up his nephew's grade tampering 2 years ago, agreed without even asking questions. By noon, Katie's nursing license was flagged for investigation. By 1400 hours, Sacred Heart Hospital's HR department received a concerning report from the school district about behavioral issues and potential security risks. The machinery of destruction moved like clockwork, each gear fitting perfectly into the next, because Hargrove had spent 20 years building this system knowing that someday he might need to dismantle Katie Morrison completely. He didn't know that Master Chief Chen was already 3 moves ahead. He didn't know that the classified file on Operation Copper Dawn had just been opened by 12 Navy SEALs whose presence alone was a legal statement no principal could survive. He didn't know that everything he'd built was about to collapse, not with a dramatic explosion, but with the quiet, irreversible finality of federal justice. All he knew was that he'd made a phone call at the right moment and eliminated his problem. He thought he'd already won. The badge reader at Sacred Heart Hospital's employee entrance beeped red. Not the green authorized pulse Katie had swiped through for 3 years. Red. A small sound with enormous weight. She stood in the humid Norfolk morning, scrubs already damp under her navy cardigan, staring at the glass doors that suddenly felt like an aquarium wall between 2 different worlds. The security guard inside, the same one who'd worked nights for 2 years, who knew her name, who'd never once made her feel like anything but a colleague, wouldn't meet her eyes. He shook his head. One small gesture. She didn't move. Inside the employee lounge, nurse manager Patricia Valencia sat at a table with Katie's personnel file open, her hands folded as if she were bracing for impact. Patricia had hired Katie 3 years ago, had written glowing performance reviews, had told her last month that she was being considered for charge nurse. Now Patricia's voice came out apologetic but sealed shut. "Katie, we received multiple concerning reports from Norfolk High School. Something about behavioral instability. Employment issues. And the principal, Dr. Hargrove, he called the reference line for Old Dominion University and made some insinuations about your reliability as a caregiver. Sacred Heart can't afford liability right now. Until we've had time to investigate, we're placing you on administrative leave." Katie's hands, steady enough to perform a 12-stitch laceration repair at 2 in the morning, now trembled against her scrub pocket. Not from fear. From the cold clarity of what had happened. "How long?" "That depends," Patricia said, and Katie heard the regret layered under protocol, the institutional machinery grinding without mercy. On the investigation. What investigation? Katie wanted to ask. Into what? She'd done nothing wrong except ask a nurse practitioner about referral patterns 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks. And Hargrove had spent 20 years as principal without anyone noticing he was funneling insurance money through his wife's urgent care clinic at a rate that should have triggered audits. She'd just asked a simple question. She'd just mentioned the billing codes didn't align with the student population's actual medical needs. She'd just made the mistake of being visible. The drive home felt like underwater movement, everything outside the windshield muted and distant. Her phone buzzed twice. First, a call from Old Dominion University. Then a text from the staffing agency. Unfortunately, the position at Portsmouth General has been filled. We'll keep your profile on file. The 2 interviews she'd scheduled. Gone. Both gone. Both cancelled within the same 6-hour window that Hargrove had made his calls. She'd checked her messages while sitting in the Sacred Heart parking lot with the engine running. Katie pulled into her driveway at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, still wearing scrubs, and just Saturday. The steering wheel was warm under her palms. She could see into the kitchen window where she and Jacob had eaten breakfast 4 days ago. He'd talked about his college roommate assignment. He'd been happy. He'd had a mother then, not a woman who got escorted out of graduation ceremonies. Not a woman whose background suddenly felt like it was eating him alive. That same morning, Dr. Hargrove sat in his office reviewing fall enrollment numbers, already thinking about next year's budget, already convinced the problem was solved. He'd made 3 phone calls. 3. And a woman who'd served 20 years in classified operations had been erased from her own life in 3 hours. He'd won. He could feel it the way some men feel power, as a kind of flush, a warmth in the chest, a certainty that the world bent to his will. He didn't know what he'd done yet. Not really. Not until late afternoon when he received an email marked urgent from the university admissions office requesting a clarification on the family safety concerns he'd mentioned regarding Jacob Morrison's mother. He had no memory of those exact words. The email included a copy of his earlier call, transcribed by their compliance system. There was his voice, his inflections, his insinuations about erratic behavior and safety risks, the careful language designed to trigger flags without making explicit accusations. He'd gone too far. In his momentum, riding the high of destroying Katie's immediate employment, he'd reached past her into his son's future. And now there was a paper trail. But Katie didn't know about the email yet. Katie sat at her kitchen table at 6 o'clock that evening, still in her scrubs because she hadn't managed to change clothes, still holding the graduation program that crinkled under her fingers every time she moved. The program had Jacob's name printed on it in careful black text. Jacob Morrison. Graduated with honors. She'd never gotten to open it. Never got to see if they'd printed anything else, a quote from him, a photo, one small thing that would have been proof she was his mother, that this moment had been real and important and hers. Jacob came home at 6:30, backpack slung across one shoulder, and stopped when he saw her. Something in her posture, the way she was sitting, the way her shoulders curved inward like she was trying to fold herself smaller, made him drop his bag. What happened? His voice cracked. 18 years old and still young enough to recognize catastrophe in a parent's body language. I was placed on administrative leave this morning. He stared at her. From Sacred Heart. She nodded. The program crinkled again. Why? Mom, you've never done anything wrong at that hospital. You're the one they call when. He stopped. Something moved across his face. Calculation. The sound of the world rearranging itself. This is about the graduation thing, isn't it? That principal. He did something. Katie couldn't answer. Couldn't say that Hargrove had systematically dismantled her credibility, her employment, her ability to work as a nurse in Norfolk, all because she'd asked a question about billing codes. Couldn't explain that there were things in her past, classified things, buried things, things that had required her to vanish once before, and now those things were being weaponized by a man who wanted to protect his fraud. "I asked about something I shouldn't have asked," Katie said finally. "At the school. And the principal decided I was unstable." Jacob's eyes narrowed. She could see him doing the math, connecting things. His acceptance to Old Dominion had come. His orientation schedule had arrived last week. But this morning, before he even left for school, he'd received an email asking him to discuss family circumstances before orientation began. There would be special monitoring of his file. He'd thought it was a scam. He'd almost deleted it. "They sent me an email about you," Jacob said. His voice had changed. Gone flat. Protective. Angry. About family safety. I thought maybe you." He couldn't finish. Couldn't say it. Couldn't ask if his mother was the reason his college was now watching him. Katie felt something break inside her chest, a fracture so clean and deep it took her breath. "Jacob. What did you do?" His voice rose. Not yelling. Worse. The calm of betrayal. "What did you actually do that makes a principal call your kid's college? Why would he do that unless you're actually the problem?" She had no answer. She couldn't tell him that she was something that couldn't exist in sunlight, that her entire life was classified above top secret, that she'd witnessed things in 2003 that resulted in 3 flag officers being court-martialed for illegal arms trafficking, and that because of those 3 flag officers, she'd been ordered to disappear, to create a new identity, to let everyone who'd known her believe she was dead. She couldn't tell him that she'd spent 20 years being nobody so that he could be somebody. She could only say, "I asked questions I shouldn't have asked." Jacob looked at her the way 18-year-old boys look at their mothers when they realize they don't know them at all. When they realize that the person who raised them might be the source of every humiliation about to hit. "Maybe they were right," he said quietly. "Maybe you always do mess things up." He grabbed his bag, didn't look at her, didn't ask for a ride. He left to stay at his friend Marcus's house. The sound of the front door closing was gentler than any door slam. Worse because of it. Katie sat alone at the kitchen table. The house pressed down on her with the weight of silence, the kind of silence that comes after violence, after the last word has been spoken and there's nothing left but aftermath. She pressed her palms flat against the table's surface, feeling the wood grain beneath her skin, grounding herself in something real. The program was still in her other hand. She didn't open it. Instead, she walked to her bedroom closet. Behind winter coats and a shoe rack, in a lockbox she hadn't opened in 4 years, were her combat boots. Worn tan leather, scuffed at the heels, the laces threaded through metal eyelets that had seen dust storms in Helmand Province. The boots had concrete dust embedded in the tread from a rescue in Sanjan Valley. Blood stain on the left ankle that would never come out. She picked them up and sat on the floor, holding something that proved she'd been real once. That she'd mattered. "But you had to stay dead," a voice in her head whispered. "You chose the grave so your son could have a name that didn't come with classified clearances and redacted files and the attention of people in suits who made other people disappear." Outside, Norfolk was settling into evening. The sky over the water turned purple-gray. Thunder rolled in the distance like a reminder that other people's consequences were coming. Katie sat holding her boots in the dark and waited. 40 miles away, in a secure facility outside Naval Station Norfolk, Master Chief Robert Chen sat in a SCIF, a sensitive compartmented information facility, a room with walls so insulated that nothing escaped in or out, with 11 other Navy SEALs. On the table in front of them was a file that had been classified top secret SCI until 2 years ago, when the statute of limitations on Operation Copper Dawn had finally expired. The file's cover page showed a photograph of a woman in navy dress blues, hair cut short, eyes that looked like they'd seen something the camera couldn't capture. The name beneath the photo read, Catherine Elizabeth Morrison, Senior Chief Petty Officer, Naval Special Warfare Command. Status, assumed deceased. Training accident, 2003. Status update, declassified file located. Presumed alive. Chen had read the file 3 times. 17 successful extractions under fire. 2 silver stars for exceptional valor. 4 bronze stars with valor for repeated acts of heroism. A Navy Cross, that rarest decoration, for a solo operation in 2003 that had saved the lives of 14 SEAL operators when their extraction went catastrophically wrong. She'd gone into Sanjin Valley with nothing but a medic pack and a pistol, disabled 2 machine gun positions with small arms fire, and conducted emergency needle decompression on the team's leading officer using a ballpoint pen when the forward operating base's medical supplies had been destroyed by IED shrapnel. Then she'd vanished. Marcus Webb, still in his Navy dress uniform from graduation, stood at the table and placed his hand on the file. This woman saved my life when I was 8 years old. When the compound collapsed in Helmand Province. She pulled me out and performed field medicine on my chest wound. I watched her do it. I remember her hands. Chen nodded. He'd read Marcus's statement 3 times. The kid had recognized Katie Morrison at his brother's graduation. Had followed her out of the auditorium. Had seen her get escorted away by security. And had known, with the certainty of someone whose life had been saved by a single pair of hands, that this woman was the missing piece of Operation Copper Dawn, the witness who could explain why 3 flag officers had been court-martialed and the entire operation had been buried. "The FBI has a warrant for the principal," said Lieutenant Sarah Reeves, the only female operator in the room and the one who'd reviewed Katie's medical credentials. "Billing fraud. Insurance kickbacks. They've been building the case for 6 months. He doesn't know Senior Chief Morrison is the witness they've been looking for," Chen said. "He thinks he's destroyed her. He thinks he's won. He's about to learn different," Marcus said. His voice was steady but his hands were shaking slightly. "Tomorrow morning. Sunrise. Full dress uniform. We show up at that school where he made her leave. We show him what he actually did." Chen looked around the table at 11 faces, operators who'd read Katie Morrison's file and understood that they'd been looking for a legend. That she'd been living in Norfolk working as a floor nurse while classified operations tried to decide what to do with a woman who knew too much and had been ordered to disappear. That a principal had tried to erase her, not knowing that the machinery of the entire United States Navy was already searching for her. "Sound check on the convoy?" Chen asked. 3 Black Hawks on standby," said Petty Officer First Class Michael Torres. "UH-60s from 160th SAW. They'll stage 10 miles out." "And the FBI?" "Agent Williams arrives at 6:30 tomorrow morning," Reeves confirmed. "She's bringing the fraud warrant. Wants to execute it while we handle the military aspect." "Handle," Chen repeated quietly. He was thinking about a woman who'd served 20 years in the shadows. Who'd been told she was dead. Who'd had to watch her own son be humiliated because she couldn't explain who she'd been. "Tomorrow, we bring her home. And we remind everyone who she is." The file closed with a sound like finality. Like the end of a secret that had lasted 2 decades. Like the beginning of something that would change everything. The morning rain hammered the Norfolk High School parking lot like applause for a performance that hadn't yet begun. Katie Morrison stood in her car for 14 minutes before turning off the engine, her hands gripping the steering wheel with the kind of white-knuckle intensity that comes from knowing you're walking into enemy territory without armor. The diploma. That's all she needed. Proof that Jacob had walked across that stage. Proof that one moment, at least, had belonged to him even though she'd missed it. She wore the same navy dress from yesterday, wrinkled now, still carrying the smell of auditorium air and her own shame. The dress felt like a costume she'd borrowed from someone braver. Katie stepped out into the rain, and the cold water immediately soaked through her hair, running down her neck in rivulets. She didn't wipe it away. The walk from the parking lot to the school's front entrance took 47 seconds. She counted each one. The hallway inside was empty. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead with that particular hum that hospitals and schools share, the sound of institutional indifference. Katie's shoes squeaked on the tile. She'd taken 3 steps toward the main office when the front doors behind her exploded open, and a convoy of 3 black SUVs pulled into the circular drive outside, their engines cutting through the morning like precision instruments. She turned. Through the glass doors, she watched as 12 Navy SEALs emerged in dress-white uniforms, the kind so sharp they could draw blood. These weren't men in costumes. These were operators wearing uniform the way apex predators wear their skin, something earned through violence and sacrifice. They formed 2 perfect lines leading toward the entrance, their boots striking the wet pavement in synchronized rhythm. Thud. 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 Principal Hargrove emerged from his office at the sound, his face already cycling through expressions, confusion, irritation, then a kind of pale recognition that something had shifted in the world and he didn't have the power to shift it back. He pushed through the entrance doors, and the rain immediately plastered his hair to his forehead. The lead officer was a master chief with a chest full of ribbons, each one a story of decisions made in darkness. His name was Chen, and he walked with the kind of purposeful calm that comes from knowing exactly how much danger you represent. He approached Hargrove directly, and when he spoke, his voice carried across the parking lot with the kind of authority that doesn't require volume. "We're here for Senior Chief Petty Officer Chief Morrison." The rain seemed to pause. The birds stopped singing. The world compressed into that single moment and everyone in it held their breath. A young man in Navy dress white stepped forward from the formation, Petty Officer Marcus Webb, 28 years old, standing at attention with the kind of bearing that speaks of years spent in places the average person couldn't imagine surviving. His eyes found Katie through the glass doors, and he nodded once. Permission to speak was automatic. "Senior Chief, permission to speak," Marcus said, his voice steady and clear. 20 years ago, you pulled me from a collapsed building in Sanjin Valley, Helmand Province. I was 8 years old. You were covered in blood that wasn't yours. You never told anyone because you weren't supposed to be there. I remember your hands. I remember you saying, "I've got you, little brother." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. These men deserve to know who you are. Master Chief Chen opened a classified file with hands that trembled, actually trembled, and began reading aloud. His voice cracked slightly on the first medal, recovered, continued with the precision of someone reciting scripture. 2 silver stars. For bronze stars with valor. He turned the page. 2 purple hearts. Another page. Navy Cross, awarded for a solo rescue operation in 2003 that extracted an entire SEAL team from a hot zone near Kabul. The second highest military decoration in the United States Navy. Chen looked directly at Hargrove. Senior Chief Petty Officer Chief Morrison operated as a combat search and rescue specialist in active theater from 2001 to 2003. She was ordered into deep cover after she witnessed actions that resulted in 3 flag officers being court-martialed. We've been looking for her for 2 years since the classification was lifted. An FBI agent stepped forward, Agent Williams, her credentials visible on the lanyard around her neck. Her voice carried the weight of federal authority and 6 months of surveillance. "Dr. Hargrove, the Federal Bureau of Investigation has been investigating your billing practices for 183 days. We have documentation of 847 fraudulent billing codes submitted through the mandatory sports physical program over a 3-year period, funneling approximately $340,000 to your wife's urgent care clinic. We also have records of your phone calls yesterday to Sacred Heart Medical Center, Norfolk General, and Old Dominion University, all made with documented intent to interfere with employment of a federal witness." She paused. "Your immediate administrative leave is effective immediately pending prosecution." The 12 SEALs remained in formation, silent, a wall of military authority that reduced Hargrove from untouchable administrator to something smaller, something that had been exposed to light and found wanting. That's when the security guard, the same one who'd escorted Katie from the auditorium yesterday, approached Hargrove with a cardboard box. He handed it over without ceremony, without apology, without anything but the flat finality of consequence. "I believe you know the way out," the guard said. Katie stepped through the doors then, and the rain hit her face like baptism. Her shoes crossed the wet pavement, and the SEALs formation shifted infinitesimally, a subtle rearrangement that placed her at the center rather than on the periphery. Master Chief Chen extended the classified file toward her, not a handoff, but an offering. Her service record. Her name. Her identity, returned. Katie took the folder with hands that didn't shake, and that composure, that absolute, unbreakable composure, was what made this moment matter more than any ceremony could have. She'd survived Helm and Province. She'd survived being erased by her government. She could survive this parking lot, this exposure, this moment where 20 years of silence ended and the truth stood under fluorescent lights and falling rain. "Welcome back, Senior Chief," Master Chief Chen said quietly. "Joint Expeditionary Base Little Creek wants you. We want you. Your country wants you." Jacob Morrison appeared at the school entrance then, drawn by the commotion, and when he saw his mother standing at the center of 12 Navy SEALs in dress whites, surrounded by federal agents and the ruins of Principal Hargrove's authority, something shifted in his young face. The shame transformed into something closer to understanding. Katie reached into the folder and found her official service photograph from 2003, a younger version of herself in uniform, the woman she'd been ordered to bury. She stared at that photograph for a long moment, really seeing herself for the first time in 2 decades, and then she looked up at Marcus Webb and met his eyes. "I need some jello," she said quietly, and Marcus laughed, a real laugh, the kind that breaks tension and restores humanity. Several of the SEALs broke formation slightly, shoulders shaking with suppressed emotion. The rain continued to fall. The parking lot bore witness. And for the first time since 2003, Senior Chief Petty Officer Catherine Morrison stood in the light instead of the shadows, her son watching, her service acknowledged, her silence finally, definitively broken. If you've made it this far, you know that some of the most dangerous people you'll ever meet are the ones nobody's watching. Subscribe for more stories about the ones who walk among us, unnoticed and underestimated, until the moment when everything changes. Like, comment, and let us know, did you guess Katie's secret before the SEALs arrived?